I am Dungeon Thrasher Lenny Blade, and this is the Dungeons and Thrashers show, and this is part 5 in my Cubicle 7 Adventures in Middle-earth series, where I go through the whole product line, tell you a little bit what I think and so on. So, we've come to the Rhovanion region guide. This is the first legit region guide, though there was a sort of guide to Lake Town in the Lore Master's Guide, if you remember, but this is the first legit, like real, proper region guide that was released for the system. And this is one of the books that I have used the most, outside of the two core rule books, so to speak. So, and I do like it. There's a lot of cool stuff in here. Some new cultures, new adversaries, a lot of information and a lot of fluff as well. I have to say, there's a lot of fluff here stuff that you could maybe do without, but it's a good read and it's definitely worth checking out. So let's take a closer look.
Alright, we're down at the table here again, and we'll take a look at the Rhovanion Region Guide book. Now, this is basically a region guide, right? So it covers the area of the Grey Mountains in the north, and down following the Anduin River, and all the vales of the river, which are separated in different parts in the book, and then down to about Dol Guldur in the south. And it also goes on the western eve of Mirkwood, right? It covers all the settlements and all of that. It also covers Mirkwood itself, of course. Including the Hall of the Elven King, Thranduil's Hall, and so on. The mountains of Mirkwood, Rosgobel. It also covers the 3 main woodman settlements: Woodland Hall, Woodman Town, and on the western side of the river, Mountain Hall, which also comes with its own new culture, but we'll talk about that later. So on the western side, on the river Anduin, there are other things that are covered here, like secret passages into Mirkwood and so on. And as you can witness on the cover of the book, it also covers the Grand Eagle's Eyrie, or the Great Eagle's Eyrie. Dwarrow Hall and Gladden Fields, things like that. So there are 2 more supplements that are closely related to this region guide. And that's the Mirkwood Campaign and the Wilderland Adventures, also known as the Wilderland Campaign, which Cubicle 7 states you don't need these 2 supplements in order to use this region guide, but you need this region guide in order to run those 2 correctly. Now, this book goes into a little bit of history, and from ancient history goes into 2941, which is the sort of the recommended starting year of Adventures in Middle-earth. So after that, each section of Rhovanion is detailed meticulously, I have to say. It's all a good read. So each section starts off with like a general description, including combat scenery, which would make sense to utilize during encounters. It also covers wildlife, which I personally find to be a little bit unnecessary and fluffy. I think the few areas with important details in that area could easily have been included in the general description instead of having its own sort of paragraph. But I'm nitpicking here. It's all right. And then it comes with Inhabitants, and this includes stat blocks of some important NPCs that we'll talk about later, and these are called notable characters. And there are also a notable places section, which is an awesome section of each area. It comes with its own sort of adventure seeds as well, though not officially called adventure seeds, but there are these blurbs of text that are very evocative. So some of the notable characters are outlaws, and so-called evil men that are evil either by nature or corrupted by the shadow. If you remember my review of the Player's Guide and the Lore Master's Guide, the shadow is sort of this game mechanic. It's like an semi-abstract entity that spreads out from Mordor, and it sort of starts to cover Rhovanion and the rest of Middle-earth as well, and it corrupts things, places, and people, especially the hearts of men, though dwarves and hobbits and even elves are not immune. So it can corrupt anyone. And other notable characters are, as you may expect, Bjorn, Radagast, Thranduil, the Lord of the Eagles, the new Great Goblin. And some of these are statted out. So you actually have Thranduil, for example. You have a complete stat block of him, Constitution 16. But so that's pretty cool. And there are other characters. Some are, just leaders of settlements or elders of settlements, or bandit chieftains and so on. There is a character, though, that I found was a little bit weird, called Frar, the Beardless, which is, as you may expect, a beardless dwarf. And it says that people believe, or the rumor sort of goes, that he was tortured by orcs and goblins and they shaved his beard. But it turns out that he lost it in a, and I quote, quarrel with the elves. And I find that really weird. Like, okay, so they shaved off his beard, so what does that mean now in dwarven lore? So if a dwarf loses his beard, it doesn't grow back? That seems weird, because this happened a long time ago and he's still beardless. I don't get it. And that's just one of the things that I find a little bit strange. Like, if anything, you would think that if a dwarf does, shave his beard, it would grow back quickly, if anything. But, I don't know. This is obviously a Cubicle 7 creation, this character. But, I mean, I like everything else about him. He's he used to be a part of the Grey Delve, which was sort of a dwarven, a dwarf hold, right? And so on. And then he's trying to rally warriors to retake that keep. And it's actually, whether he retakes the Grey Delve or not, it's actually up to the characters, and it's a part of the Mirkwood campaign. So that's one of the examples on how the other two books sort of completes this one. So that's cool. It's just the beard thing there that I thought was a little bit weird. When it comes to notable places, there's everything from lost watchtowers and hidden fortifications and settlements, and hidden passages into Misty Mountains, Elven and Dunedain campsites, and there are more specific places like the House of Bjorn, Rosgobel, the Eagle's Eyrie, Thranduil's halls are also detailed with maps and all that good stuff. One thing I should mention as well is that in the description of Mirkwood, which takes up a big chunk of this book, as it should, there are some cool elements and sort of traits that you can use to enhance the experience of traveling through Mirkwoods. There are examples of what could happen, for example, your characters cannot take short rests because the darkness is encroaching and they can't fall asleep, or their fresh bread is somehow covered with maggots next time they look, and things like that. So they're like no light, no food, no water, and they have like all descriptions of what can happen. There are also special rules for if you have a bout of madness inside Mirkwood. It's even worse than having a bout of madness outside. If you remember, a bout of madness happens when you've accumulated enough shadow points, and then you make saving throws and you roll on tables and so on. And if you do have a bout of madness in Mirkwood, something extra happens. Like it's so they have special rules or guidelines, I should say, for that. So that's pretty cool. There are also 13 new Fellowship undertakings, many of which are very, very Tolkien-esque and fits the setting perfectly. The new cultures. So I talked already about the Woodmen of Mountain Hall, which are basically the same as regular woodmen, except that they're friendly towards dwarf and they are martial as opposed to, I think the other ones are frugal. So these are much more military oriented, and they're all warriors as opposed to hunter-gatherers. Not all of them, but you know what I mean. That's the main culture. They also have a cultural virtue available called Goblin Hunter, which gives you advantage on attacks versus goblins until you are wounded, which is a fairly powerful virtue. The next new culture is Wild Hobbits. So these are a little bit overpowered, believe it or not. So they get a dexterity +2, and they can also increase 2 additional ability scores by 1, so they have a +4 basically. They also have a virtue called Untroubled by the Shadow, which is very powerful. So if they go into a blighted place, instead of doing a DC 15 as is normal wisdom corruption saving throw, then they only have to do a DC 5, which is very powerful. Now the Wild Hobbits, I think, is a Cubicle 7 creation. If I'm mistaken, please correct me, but I can't remember any hobbits settling in the wild outside of the regular hobbit settlements. But I may be wrong. Maybe there's something in some weird story, but I can't remember any official Tolkien writing that mentions wild hobbits. And then there are the Wayward Elves, and this is the last new culture. And these are basically elves of Mirkwood, but these are like the tricksters that you can read about in The Hobbit. You know, they seek pleasure and amusement, and they play cruel tricks on travelers through Mirkwood and things like that. I kind of like this one. They do have a cool virtue available, cultural virtue, which is called Call of Mirkwood, in which they can spend inspiration and become invisible. Which actually fits fairly well with the book, The Hobbit. So I do like that. The last part is, of course, the Adversaries, the new Adversaries section. And they have Grimhawks, Ancient Basilisks, Gallows Weed, which is a cool plant-based creature, Marsh Dwellers, Wild Men of Mirkwood, Hillmen of Gundabad. These are like the evil men I talked about before. There's also this orc called Gorgol, son of Bolg, and he actually wields the scimitar of Azog, which is a powerful scimitar with a damage of 2d6, +5 in this case. Nagra, the chief of Wargs. And there's a captain as well, Magaz, the Orc Captain. So he was actually a part of the war surrounding the Battle of the Five Armies, but he didn't lead the armies. He's a coward, you see. So he commanded the rear guard at Fenbridge Castle. And then when the tide turned and they started losing the battle, you know, he fled with his men. So now he is sort of living around here. We've also got the new Great Goblin statted out. If you remember, the first Great Goblin was slain by Gandalf. The second one actually died in the Battle of the Five Armies, and this is the third one, so he's also statted out. So that's cool. There are some forest goblins and some other spiders. There are 3 really cool spiders that are the offspring of Shelob, Fat Sarquin, Taller the Hunter, and Tilquin the Weaver. So these are all statted out. They're really cool adversaries. Anyways, all in all, a really cool book. Recommended.